My name is Andy Gilman, and I'm the director of the Agora Foundation. And what we do is a couple of primary things. We do what we call Great Book seminars, and those are about twice a month. And those are on the great books of Western and Eastern civilization, and that would be philosophy, theology, literature, poetry, math, science, and so on. And typically we have one-day events, either around Ojai, sometimes in Los Angeles. And what we decided was that we wanted to have a 4-day seminar, and we wanted to tackle the subject, what is humanity's place in the natural world? And that question we wanted to look at, how have people thought about that question over the last 2,000 years, but also having nature walks, having dinners, lectures, and tonight, and this. So all the different ways that one would try to address this question, and it's complicated and not easy. So that's what we've attempted to do, and that's what you're doing here tonight, and I'm thankful you're all here. Logistically, there's a bathroom around the corner over here, but also one in the room over there that Ulrich opened up. So if you do want to go over there, you also get to see what a room is like. And I want to mention one thing from the retreat so that all the nonprofits know this. All local nonprofits who do a fundraiser or a special event at the Ojai retreat get the first 2 hours for free. So a panel or anything like that. Hopefully you knew that already, but now you do. Okay. So there's a few people I want to thank. The Ojai Retreat and Inn, the Ojai Valley Chamber of Commerce is also a sponsor of this. And I want to alert you that the Ojai Chautauqua, the other thing that Agora does, which a lot of you have attended, we'll be having a panel on water Sunday, September 30th. And that's going to be with the general managers of Callegas, Ventura, and Casitas, so we can get a sense of where we at on the water situation, and also a few other people. And if you've gone to our other panels, you'll know the packets we put together, try to put as much information as we can and get a sense of where we're at on this question. After this event, there is a reception which will be at the Pink Moment Terrace, and that does have a fee of $25. A lot of you have paid already, but if you decide you do want to come, we can make some arrangement, and that'll be some heavy hors d'oeuvres, some white sage catering, and wine. So with that, I want to turn it over, just starting to my left, and have each of our panelists introduce themselves, their organizations, and what their organization's mission is.
Start with me.
Please.
My name is Peter Cantle. I am the current and past president of the Ojai Valley Defense Fund, and our mission is to fund legal action for groups that are undertaking efforts to protect and sustain the environmental quality of the Ojai Valley for public benefit. That's the essential mission statement of the Ojai Valley Defense Fund.
I guess first of all, I want to just greet everybody this evening. It's wonderful to be able to see you here. My name is Todd Cozart. I am the executive director for the Ojai Valley Green Coalition here in Ojai. My background is as a sustainability educator. I recently stepped away from that field to plop myself down into this position. Just to kind of give you a little context, the Ojai Valley Green Coalition became a 501c3 nonprofit, environmental nonprofit, in 2007. But I think it's safe to say that the seeds of its inception came out of what were called the Ojai Valley-wide discussions that were facilitated by Supervisor Steve Bennett in 2006. I don't know if any of you were part of those discussions, but what came out of those discussions was an awareness that there needed to be an organization like the Ojai Valley Green Coalition here in the Valley. The mission of the organization is pretty simple. You know, I'll paraphrase it to say that we want to support and build the networks of relationships that allow us to advance a common vision of a climate resilient Ojai Valley. It's kind of simple, but it is also it's also pretty ambitious in a lot of different ways. And we do this primarily by 3 areas of focus. One shouldn't surprise anybody. It's related to water security. The other is regenerative land use and food production. And the other is something that we call regenerative community. And love to talk to you more about each one of those areas, because I could go on for quite some time about those.
My name's Kimberly Rivers, and I'm Executive Director of CFROG, Citizens for Responsible Oil and Gas, an organization that formed here in the Ojai Valley in 2013. Our mission is to defend communities, wild places, and open spaces from the negative impacts of oil and gas extraction. And what that looks like in action, I can actually tell you all about something that just came on our radar today. We learned that in a cleanup after a spill that was off of Cañada Larga, there's an oil lease there. The spill happened in March, and we've been monitoring the cleanup since then. The investigation by the State Water Board led them to find an illegal sump pit that is not allowed in Ventura County. And they have photographs, and so we're monitoring it, and we'll be reporting about the action that the Water Board hopefully is going to be taking, and also ensuring that our county planning department, which has issued the land use permit for that oil facility, is held accountable for the compliance inspections that they're supposed to do for those conditional use permits. We're going to be pulling that permit to review it and see when the last time the county did a compliance review, and we think there will be sometime since the last one occurred. Thanks so much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Caryn Bosson, and since January, I have been executive director of an organization called the CREW, Concerned Resource Environmental Workers. And since 1991, the CREW has been providing paid employment to young people, mostly low income, mostly male, although we try to get females, and these days, mostly 18 to about 23, in work doing outdoor conservation work. So everything from building and maintaining trails to doing fire abatement to doing ecological restoration, all of the work that needs to be done to manage our land and our resources. So these young people get job skills, community service awareness and participation, leadership skills. They learn how to do a good day's work, and they get on career ladders that take them to the Forest Service, firefighting, different conservation careers in the future, whether or not they attend college. So many, many young people from the Ojai Valley have been through the CREW in the past and hopefully in the future.
Hi, I'm David White, and I'm wearing a couple of hats today in the environmental realm. I am the Executive Director for Center for Regenerative Agriculture. That was formed in 2002, and for the locals, Steve Sprinkle is the president. That is, the mission in short is to promote all aspects of regenerative agriculture which increase soil carbon content, and we do that with community workshops, with lectures and presentations, and we train interns, particularly in soil biology and the soil food web. I'm trained as a microscopist and cell biologist, so we look at a lot of compost under the microscope. I was doing that this morning with interns. And I also run a watershed education program, which is called Once Upon a Watershed, and that's actually a project that's fiscally sponsored by the Oak Grove School. Thank you, Oak Grove School. And that's active at 12 schools in the Ventura River watershed. And we're here to inspire children to get connected with their ecological address, their own watershed, and to take action to restore and care for it.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Brendan Taylor. I'm the new Stewardship Director for Ojai Valley Land Conservancy. And put simply, our mission is to protect the views, trails, water, and wildlife of Ojai Valley. We do that by working with willing landowners who want to put their land into conservation. And once we take the land into conservation, we engage in ecological restoration on the land. We allow scientific research. We have educational programs and opportunities on our preserves through our volunteer docent nature walks, through our lecture series all about Ojai. We also provide public access. We have over 2,300 acres and 27 miles of trails that hopefully many of you have used that we provide to keep the community engaged with their local conserved lands.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Kuyper, the Executive Director of Los Padres Forest Watch. I'm from Santa Barbara. Anybody else here from Santa Barbara? No, I'm the only one. Nobody even like born or grew up in Santa Barbara? Okay, there we go. Couple. Awesome. Okay, I feel some camaraderie here now. So, I say I'm from Santa Barbara. My organization is based in Santa Barbara, but we protect the entire Los Padres National Forest. It's a huge national forest. It goes all the way up to Big Sur, all the way down to the LA County line, and then all the way inland to the San Joaquin Valley. So Santa Barbara is a good centralized point for us to be. But it always feels to me like coming home when I'm here in Ojai. It's just a very much more tightly knit community. The forest is literally right at our doorstep here. And the people are nice, right? Yeah. So I say we protect the Los Padres National Forest. I guess probably the first question that comes up after that is, well, why do you guys protect it? Isn't it protected already? And yes, national forests do have some protection, but it's not like a national park where you have some areas set aside for recreation and then large chunks of wilderness that are undeveloped. National forests, on the other hand, they're open to a wide variety of land use activities. So you can have oil drilling, you can have mining, you can have logging, you can have commercial livestock grazing, pipelines, transmission lines. Basically anything that can be built in a national forest as long as it goes through an approval process. And my organization, Forest Watch, participates in that process as the Forest Service is considering whether to approve certain land uses. We'll point out, well, hey, why don't you guys move this over here away from the creek? Or sometimes we might oppose something altogether. Other times we might support beneficial projects like habitat restoration. So there's a wide variety of things that the Forest Service approves, and we're sort of the watchdog organization for the U.S. Forest Service, which in this day and age is challenging for sure. The other question that comes up is, well, how do you guys protect the Los Padres National Forest? So a lot of advocacy work, as I said, writing letters, attending hearings, working with experts. We want to make sure the best science is used when these decisions are made. We do volunteer projects out in the field, cleaning up trash, removing old fencing so that wildlife can roam freely across the landscape. And then we also do a lot of public outreach and education also. It's amazing how many people do not know that we have a national forest right here in our own backyard. So there's just a lot of outreach about why it's important to protect and what the threats are to this landscape. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. First, can everybody hear okay? Okay. Second, you might notice Ray Powers over there. If you don't know him, there's Ray. And he is filming this, which will go on our website and our YouTube. So if it was too hot to come out, you can send the link out and see that. And then over there in the corner there is Nikki Gilman. Yes, we're related. And she's live streaming this onto Facebook right this second. So that's great. And then finally, I forgot to thank Ojai Unified School District gave us these 8 microphones and cables because they really liked what we were doing, which is great. Okay. My next question, and it need not go in order, but just as you feel the calling to answer, what is your personal conviction of what our responsibility is to the natural world? Another way of asking that is, why do you do the work that you do?
I can take a crack at that.
Please.
And if you don't mind, I went a little light on the introduction because I wasn't really sure how much to give, and then everybody else filled in nicely. So what I'd like to tell you about the Ojai Valley Defense Fund is that we formed up in 2009, 2010, and really the genesis of the organization was the brainchild of a local realtor, of all folks, who had seen the movie 300 about the Spartans in Thermopylae Pass, and he said, Ojai needs its own 300. So the concept was brought to many of our friends. John Brazenly, John was the original founder of the Defense Fund. He brought several of us in with the idea that we are going to raise, eventually targeted $1 million to have a legal fund, a backstop to fund action when it became necessary to ward off massive development. So that's what, in essence, the Defense Fund does. I'm happy to say we have hit that target. It took a lot of time, and none of us are natural fundraisers, but fundraise we did, and we hit the $1 million fund level. We're still raising funds, so keep that coming in. But we also did our first grant just recently, and it's to the Citizens for Responsible Oil and Gas. So Kim and I have a natural relationship on this panel. Getting back to this question, I do this because I'm that kid you probably knew who was always out picking up snakes and digging into bird nests and grabbing frogs and doing all that stuff. I've been either playing with animals and things like that or studying them since I was 3, at least. So working in the natural world, as my wife will attest, has always been a passion for me. So I became a biologist and an ecologist academically. That's my training. I've done air pollution work and planning work for the county of Santa Barbara. I now have my own small business doing water management work, which is also very challenging and fun, and it kind of fits in the wheelhouse here. So this, to me, doing this kind of work for the Defense Fund and working in the community, we had a little colloquy out on the patio before we started, and the sense of that was, thinking globally and acting locally, the famous expression. So to me, that's always been a driver. Try to work locally for good benefit. Try to work in a sustainable way, make my wife and my kids proud of the work I do, and make my folks proud. They were the ones that instilled in me a desire to do and leave the world in a better place, and that's kind of what drives me. So that's why I do this.
And I guess I'm sort of in the same boat as Peter here. I definitely grew up as a person who had the good fortune to have an affinity for the natural world and had the opportunity to spend time in natural environments in a way that gave me, a great deal of fulfillment, both, as a developing personality and spiritually in lots of different ways. I kind of come at this concept of stewardship a little bit differently, I think, though, than most folks. I think I mentioned that I'm an environmental sustainability educator. That's my background. And for the most part, I think there's an implication in stewardship, especially environmental stewardship, that somehow humanity over the last 10,000 years has, through no fault of our own, reached a place of wisdom where we have the ability to be in a relationship with nature to be able to support the natural systems that have supported life for the last 3 billion years. And I actually think it's just the opposite. I think that when I think of stewardship, I think that nature is essentially the steward here. That nature for 3 billion years has been conducive to supporting life in lots of different ways through lots of forms of ecological and evolutionary experimentation that we have nowhere near been able to come close to. So one of the things that I've discovered in my own life is, my teacher has become the natural world and the natural systems that have supported life. And that out of that, there are certain principles that I think that I've really been able to discover through both my nature as my teacher and a whole number of ecologists, deep ecologists, and wildlife biologists, and indigenous elders, and that there really are certain fundamental principles that we need to be aware of, that I needed to be aware of. One had to do with that there's no waste in nature. You're never going to see that in nature. You're not going to see nature because nature has to be able to circulate and cycle matter throughout all the natural systems. We have a finite supply of matter on this planet. We have an infinite supply of energy that comes from the sun. And nature always uses sunlight to drive its ecological systems. Nature also has developed intricate systems to ensure that there's diversity in the natural systems. And diversity is one of the ways that we ensure resilience and adaptability. Nature is also, there's a lot of discussion about competition in ecological systems, and there certainly is. But one of the ways that nature has survived to be able to provide the kind of cohesion that has allowed life to exist on this planet is not really through competition. It's been more through the ability to network and relate and build relationships. And those are principles that I've found that have really come to guide me personally, both as an educator and as a person who works in and being able to benefit the ecological systems that exist here in our valley. So that's where I'm coming from, folks.
Thanks.
Even though we don't have to go down the line. So Andy actually gave us this question outside, so we had a little time to think about it, I think. And what really popped into my head is that there's lots of reasons why I do this work, but the thing that popped in first was because I can. And there's a conversation going on, I think, nationally too. I feel really privileged to be able to do this work. I live in a place where I was in the right place at the right time, asked to apply, and it's worked out beautifully. So I'm taking a little bit different approach, taking a little bit more personal response, but it's allowed my family to continue living here in this place and having an impact in a way that really is personally important to me, and learning that we can have a really powerful impact locally on a big issue. So yeah.
The year was 1984. I didn't grow up with my hands in the dirt or touching snakes or anything like that. I still wouldn't. But I was living in LA, and I was working at what many people would think would be a dream job as the assistant to an agent at the William Morris Agency. And I thought there has to be something more in life than this. And I saw a flyer that was for a little group called Tree People. It said, join our effort. We're going to plant 1 million trees in LA before the 1984 Olympics. And so I said, sure, I'll check it out. Everybody was in their 20s, so was I. And I experienced a feeling of complete body euphoria the minute that I started getting involved in doing that work. And I became incapacitated to do anything else. And so there went my glamorous career, or any the riches and fame. But I haven't looked back. And I think the thing that for me just draws me to this work is we can shape our future. It doesn't just have to happen to us. We can participate wholeheartedly and creatively and make it different. And I think we can do that in the environment. We can do that with young people. We can do that through the arts and all kinds of other endeavors. I just happen to be drawn to the environment and youth.
I guess we are going down the line.
Yeah.
I just do it for the big bucks. Right. Oh, okay. So it's interesting that they say about the two guys at the end who are like, oh, connection to nature as a kid. And I get to work with kids and to connect kids with nature. And I think it's really important to connect kids to nature before the age of 7. But if they don't connect before the age of 7, there is still hope. Right? And Caryn's told me that story before, so I'm familiar with it. But it's connection to the natural world and being able to foster that connection in the youth. If we're going to have the next generation protect nature, they need to know what it is. They need to connect to it. And I really enjoy my connection to it. And I'm definitely more attracted to be out there checking out what the red-tail's doing than sitting in here. But, here we are. But, the work that, like, the Land Conservancy is doing, that's so important. They're protecting nature. And I get to take kids out on the Land Conservancy property, and we get to check it out. So that motivates me, and I enjoy that.
For me personally, it's definitely, in a word, the people that have engaged me in this line of work, have engaged me with conservation. When you work in this line of, in this field, you tend to run into people who have similar values and interests as you do, people who want to care for the environment in the same way that you do. And what do you know, when you work with people who are similar to you, have similar interests, it really motivates you to do a good job, to be engaged, and to continue to work hard to conserve the environment. So it's as simple as that for me.
Yeah, just continuing the conversation that we've been having about how important it is to get youth involved. I think I was probably 2 or 3 when I went on my first camping trip to Yosemite National Park. And as I grew older, my family would go back there year after year after year, and I developed this appreciation for the natural world. And then as I got older, my dad and I would go out backpacking in the Sierra. And so again, it just reinforced this connection with the outdoors and a lot of that is missing in today's society with children in particular. And I see it with my own kids who are 6 and 8 right now. It's so easy for them to get attached to that television screen or the iPad or the Nintendo Switch, I think is the latest thing that they're talking about. If it's not one thing, it's another. And so it's really important as a dad, and my wife will agree as a mother to get our kids outside and spending as much time out in nature as possible, because that's how she and I and a lot of people in this room first developed our appreciation to nature. And there's a lot of forces working against that in this technological age. And so it's important to bring that up in discussions like this. As I was growing up in high school, I saw, this was down in Orange County, and so I saw a lot of hillsides where I used to go hiking as a kid get gobbled up, it seemed like overnight, by housing developments. And so at the same time I had this appreciation for nature, I also learned very directly how fragile of a state nature can be, and the threats that are just seemingly insurmountable sometimes, and realized that the decision makers don't always make the right decisions. And so I said, I'm going to go to law school so that I can sue people and hold decision makers accountable. So that's what I did. I'm still paying that off, and I think they excuse the rest of your law school debt after you die. And so on my nonprofit salary, that's exactly how it's going to play out. I'm not an attorney, but it gave me a great legal background to get an inner understanding of how decisions are made, how we can get our decision makers to better protect the environment. And it often comes down to knowing what the laws are, what the policies are, and how that plays out in real life.
So something Jeff said there, I think, is really important. It resonated with me, and to those of you who grew up in California or other areas that have really faced this rampant development push. As a kid, I grew up in San Pedro, which is down the coast, and I had cousins who lived in San Diego. So we would run down PCH, and on the right-hand side going south would be the ocean. On the left-hand side would be orange groves, and you can't find that anymore. And the same for the San Fernando Valley, where my wife's folks grew up, and where she spent some time. So that sense of an older California that is precious, but really, really ephemeral, is one of the things that resonates deeply with me about the Defense Fund. So organizations like the Land Conservancy are so important, and to me, the Defense Fund, standing as a backstop for preventing rampant development and the concretization of a special little valley like this, that resonates with my values very deeply, and it was one of the reasons I came on the board very quickly when John Brazenly said, hey, what do you think? So I wanted to reflect on that, and I appreciate Jeff's point about that.
Okay, gonna tag on a little bit.
No, this is exactly what I want.
Okay, because it does bring up something else for me, is environmental sustainability is future oriented, and it's one of the things that I always come back to, which is, yeah, okay. So what I mean by being future oriented is that it is really designed to be able to provide the resources that we enjoy today for the future generations, and we're talking about the children that are around us today. And so it is a really driving motivation for me as well, is that concern to be able to provide this, remarkable resources that exist on this planet to sustain life on Earth. For them to be available for the future generations is a critical motivating factor that I just is like something that kind of sometimes keeps me awake at night, thinking about, okay, how are we going to make sure that this happens for the future generations? And it's, for some cultures, it's a natural motivating thought. It's something that people learn. This is a relationship people will learn when they're young children. And that's why it's so important to hit the youth, to be able to connect nature with the youth and to connect the natural resources and the systems that support life on Earth with the youth, because once they have that ingrained, they understand the importance of being able to preserve it for future generations. They understand the logic and the justice and the rightfulness of that. No
final thoughts on the subject? Okay. Peter, actually, you touched on this a second ago, but maybe you can elaborate. What opportunities do you have to work with each other to accomplish your missions?
As I mentioned in one of my opening spiels, I don't remember which one it was, first or second, we spent a number of years trying to raise funds. We had received applications from grantees, probably 4 or 5, which, because we have very strict criteria about who the Defense Fund will grant money to, we respectfully declined to fund those. And one of the criteria that we have to go by when a grantee comes to us and requests money is this a ripe case? Is this ready to go? Have they exhausted all legal remedies? And is this really so critical that they need funding now? Well, we found that case very recently, and we granted CFROG, the Citizens for Responsible Oil and Gas. CFROG was our first grantee. After 9+ years of fundraising and considering other grantee requests and turning them down, CFROG met that standard. So I'm very pleased to be on the panel here with Kimberly, and it's a really science-based organization, which I think is important, and they're doing a very good job. They send us reports of how they're going and how they're using the money we've granted, and that's not like we gave them a vast amount of money. In fact, to her credit, and you should speak more to this, but they just got a massive grant from the Air Resources Board, which will help, and so that's huge for CFROG, and I don't want to steal Kim's thunder on that. But we do work with CFROG, and we have worked with other organizations to tell them exactly what our funding criteria are and why they're important. And there's also, I have to say, just to be completely candid about it, we've gotten, there have been attempts to draw the Ojai Valley Defense Fund into things that are kind of more like neighborly disputes. He cut down his tree, and I didn't like the fact that he cut down his tree. Or, she's going to put a swimming pool over here, and we don't think that's a good thing. The Defense Fund should get on that. Those are not the kind of issues we're talking about. We're really talking about and concerned about the bigger issues for the valley that could fundamentally change the environmental character. And by that, kind of going back to Todd's point, which is keeping the long view. One of the biggest things we have tried to inculcate in our board is the long view, the 100-year look. And by that, a very important part of that is how we recruit onto our board. And so a big focus has been getting younger folks to our board, because there are plenty of old farts like me and even older than me. And, that's good. And that's typically, to be kind of crass about it, perhaps that's where more money sits. If you're a fundraiser, that's typically where you're looking. You're not looking to younger folks because they haven't made the buck yet, right? So that's the crass part of fundraising. But the really interesting part of it has been to try to find people in the valley and actually outside the valley that are so interested in the long-term look and value and understand what it is the Defense Fund is trying to accomplish, that we're trying to recruit them onto the board so that they can bring young attitude, young think, a grasp and an embrace of technology that could be valuable to the Defense Fund going forward, and keeping really the heart of what the Defense Fund and Ojai, a livable Ojai, is all about.
All right, I've got something to say here, but I'm going to break the mold and see if we can take it down the line a little bit. Anybody else got something?
Sure. So Once Upon a Watershed takes students from 12 schools, and we go out onto the Land Conservancy's property for the schools in the Ojai Valley, and we also go to the Ventura, what's it called now? Ventura Land Trust. We go and use their preserves for the schools down in the lower part of the watershed. But I've touched with a lot of different organizations here. I mean, I was a board member of the Green Coalition for 6 years. In 2010, we had the crew going. I worked with them to transition them to more watershed restoration work. I've been treasurer of the Keep the Sespe Wild since 1990. And, that's directly working, with Los Padres Forest Watch. In fact, I think you've taken over a lot of what Alistair was doing there. So I think for our small community, there's just the ability to work with a number of different organizations. And the interface is really about connecting at the farmer's market and telling folks where the best oranges are or something. I don't know.
A little piggybacking on that theme, for CFROG, we're just 5 years old this year. So as sort of the new kid on the block in a young organization, partnerships are vital to the work that we do. So CFROG has been a co-claimant in legal action with Los Padres Forest Watch and Center for Biological Diversity on a case we all just appealed in Santa Paula Canyon behind Thomas Aquinas College regarding the county approving 19 new oil wells. You know, we need to be able to leverage resources, and finding like-minded organizations that we can come together on a project, right, that costs money allows us to take that action to defend those spaces. And of course, you know, funds that provide the monies that allow us to do things. So the project that the Defense Fund has allowed CFROG to continue working on is the Ventura County General Plan Update. And the specific Defense Fund money is going to defend the Ojai Valley Area Plan, specifically the air emissions thresholds for projects. There's a limit, and we believe that limit is under threat. And so CFROG has hired expert legal counsel to help us in that process, and that document will be in effect till 2040 when it's approved. So in terms of taking that long view. And also in that general plan work that we've done, CFROG sort of took the first step in forming a coalition that has just met one time. There's going to be another meeting here in the fall as that general plan process heats up. But I think that several organizations up here were part of that coalition, and it's countywide environmental, housing, environmental justice organizations are coming together because we have like-minded goals for land use across the county. So just describing some of the necessity of partnerships for the work that we do.
While you have the microphone, funding is an issue for every nonprofit in the history of the world. Do you want to just talk about the grant you just received?
Sure.
Please.
So CFROG was just awarded almost $500,000 from the California Air Resources Board. And so this is restricted funding. Yeah, it is pretty incredible. And so I am new to this work. I've been with CFROG for 2 years, and I hadn't written a grant before starting with CFROG. And so it's pretty incredible on a personal and professional level. Yeah. So, and so the work is part of AB 617, which is recently passed legislation that encourages local air districts and requires them to go into the communities and improve air quality at the community level. And specifically, this funding program is meant for nonprofit organizations to build our capacity to work with our local air districts to do just that. So our program is called Ground Truthing Air Quality Impacts in Ventura County. We will be working in 2 environmental justice communities along Ventura Avenue and in Oxnard, and then an overly burdened community, Upper Ojai, and forming community air action teams in each of those areas who will be trained in holding in using handheld air quality monitors paired with smartphones that will track in real time. So the individual residents will walk around their community according to scientific protocol and sample air, and that data will be open sourced. We're partnering with Cal State University Channel Islands to do a drone study of the seeps in Upper Ojai. And the students there will also be collating all the data from the communities, presenting it back to those communities to determine where stationary air monitors will be placed. Currently, the county has 5 air monitors countywide. We are going to be adding 10 to that with the grant. So that's it in a nutshell.
Working together?
$500,000 is our annual budget, so that's
This
impressive.
doubled it's over 2 years, but it more than doubled our annual budget.
It's good work. And it reminds me, one of the most rewarding ways that we've collaborated is by identifying unconventional allies. I think on a lot of issues, environmentalists are often dismissed quickly by certain people, and So what we try to do in those situations is to identify other people who not in a million years you would think would be working with us on an issue, team up with them because we have a common goal in mind, and it really emboldens the entire campaign. And I'll give you an example of how that worked really well. It was about 10 years ago, just on the backside of the mountains. If you drive all the way up 33 and back down into the Ojai Valley, the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, was going to auction off parcels of land right next to the National Forest for $2 an acre to oil companies. And this was actually private land with federal mineral rights underground. And so they were actually auctioning off a private landowner's land. And this is when we had a staff of one person and me, yeah, and a very small budget. But we said, okay, we're going to figure out who these landowners are that are getting the land basically auctioned off from underneath them, and we're going to send them a letter telling them what the BLM wants to do with their land. And these are all vacant parcels out in the middle of nowhere. And so we got the parcel data, we sent letters out, and we really only had 45 days to figure out who these landowners were, send them a letter to let them know what was happening. Hopefully they would call us back or email us, and then we would get them to file a protest with the BLM, just a one-page letter saying, hey, we oppose our land being auctioned off. And it actually worked really well. We had backwoods characters from all aspects of the political spectrum. One guy in particular with a cowboy hat named Newt wrote a letter to the BLM, and he was on the side of the environmentalists. So it was one of those things where, in the end, we prevailed. We got the BLM to scrap all 10,000 acres of that oil and gas lease sale from the auction block, and it was really rewarding to be working with people that you wouldn't normally think we'd be teaming up with on a day-to-day basis. So.
I think about, Todd has mentioned thinking about long-term sustainability and how that applies to our partnerships. For us to continue to conserve the environment and work together to protect this area, we have to sustain each other. So as one example, the partnership that the OVLC has with the crew. The crew provide us a vital source of labor. They help us with invasive species removal. They do fire clearance for us. In the past, we've partnered on grants with them. So by us employing them, we engage local youth. We give money back to the local economy. Hopefully, as a part of that, the crew employees are becoming engaged with the natural environment. They start to care about conservation so that long term they'll stay in the valley and they will support us down the line, because we are conserving this land in perpetuity with the support of the community. So if we work together now, over time, that is going to benefit both of us.
Thank you.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you. Yes, we do work with the Land Conservancy in that way, and we're working a little bit now with the Green Coalition. And I just want to say to all of you that if you have property and you need some conservation work done, whether it's tree planting or swales built or brush clearance, the crew is a workforce for the valley as well, for private landowners.
Thank you. Todd?
Well, I just was going to say that from my perspective, the coalition, the coalition is totally where we are coming from. For us to be able to develop networks of relationship and partnerships is exactly what we are designed to do and what we hope to be able to do. We're primarily a volunteer-driven organization in many ways, but what this allows us to do is to be able to look at each other and look down, this particular row right here, and our abilities. We know that it is going to take these relationships with each other to really achieve what we hope to achieve, which is a climate resilient valley that's regenerative, and it will be available to future generations in that way. So I think partnerships are really critical. I also know that we all hit the ground running every day. And so there's times, Kim and I have been talking about meeting for coffee for like 2 months now.
That's a lot of coffee.
So there's a lot of coffee down there. And you know, and the reason that we're sometimes not able to work together is mainly because we're hard at work on the different projects that we all have responsibilities for. That doesn't mean that, you know, we don't have a great deal of desire and affection for the work that each of us does in the different areas, and they don't overlap. And when they do overlap, man, we are the first people to reach out to each other, in my opinion.
Thank you. So I have a couple more questions, but I want you to be thinking about any questions that you might want to ask in a minute. So I want to save some time for that. But here's a question, and from anybody. How do you balance priorities between residents, government, business, and the land?
I can share an example from OVLC. We had a trail that we had to close after the Thomas fire, the Chaparral Crest Trail. Sensitive wildlife habitat was stressed by the fire, and we made a decision to close it to protect this habitat area. So we prioritized the land over government, businesses, and residents. This was not without a backlash. People were not thrilled that we took trail mileage away from our 27 miles. People are still using the trail, even though it was technically closed at this point. We made this decision because we do need to balance general public interest in being out and recreating on our preserves with protecting the environment. We're meant to protect the environment, right? And if you actually read the OVLC mission statement, it doesn't actually reference trails. It doesn't actually reference providing public access. It's more about protecting the local landscape, the local environment. However, we have understandably realized that a primary method of protecting this environment is engaging the community. The best way to do that is to get the community out there. So our number one tool really to achieve our mission is have people out on the preserves recreating. What do we do though when the recreation potentially negatively impacts the environment? At a point we have to make a decision to protect the environment, and that does have unintended benefits, I guess, if you will. It draws in wildlife to this habitat area. It leaves the preserve unscarred by trails. I'm sure many of you are familiar with our Valley View Preserve, and it's wonderful to go hike there, but you can also see the Fox Canyon and Lucy trails from the center of town. So if we take trails away, we improve the views, the view shed, and again, that is an important aspect of our mission. So we listen to the community. We take heart about their desire to be out on the preserves, recreating. We understand that sometimes the way they communicate that to us is by not adhering to our signs. So we try to balance it out. We are, in fact, building a new trail. Hopefully some of you will volunteer to help build that new trail here in a couple weeks. But at times, to fulfill our mission and to hopefully better serve the community, we need to protect the natural environment and prioritize that over people's recreation experience.
I think there's often, I guess probably since the dawn of the conservation movement, there's been this effort afoot to disengage protecting the environment with protecting the economy, right? And we especially hear this in political discourse now, where environmentalists are pegged as anti-jobs and anti-business, when really I think the two go hand in hand more than a lot of people think. And a good example of that was last year when the Trump administration proposed reviewing the status of a bunch of national monuments throughout the West. And our very own, the big one that everyone heard about was Bears Ears National Monument in Utah, but there were a couple dozen monuments on the review list, and our very own Carrizo Plain National Monument, which is right next to the Los Padres National Forest here, it was on the list of monuments to be reviewed as well. So we were heavily involved in that. It's not part of the National Forest, but it's right next to it, and faces a lot of the same threats and issues that the National Forest does. So we said, okay, we've got our audience here is the Trump administration who's doing this review. We need to show them how important the Carrizo Plain National Monument is to local business owners. And so we hired somebody part-time up in San Luis Obispo to build up as much support from local business as we could, and with a focus on tourists visiting the area. You know, with the super bloom, it draws a big crowd, and but really it's all connected, and we cast a wide net in terms of getting support from all businesses, and we ended up getting 160 different local businesses to all sign on to our position statement, demanding that the Carrizo Plain National Monument be preserved and its protection stay in place. So it's just one example of many where conservation groups are partnering more and more with businesses, whether it's local businesses like Patagonia, who we're so fortunate to have right down the road here, or others on a smaller scale, and really showing that if we protect the environment, we can also protect our local economy as well. And that's a really powerful message.
And it was preserved. I think it's important to say it was preserved.
Yeah, it wasn't taken off the list, but it was not. It has not been targeted yet for reduction or elimination. So we think we're safe, and so we got a good outcome on that, I think. Yeah.
I make a comment on. Oh, we got a question.
Go ahead. I was going to wait till later just for them to answer, but is it relevant for this, what they're talking about right this second?
I forgot what the question they were talking about.
How do they balance
I was
between...
focusing on the connective network.
Okay, okay, sure.
Because all these groups are Ojai focused, and I grew up in Ojai, and I love Ojai, and I'm back here. But I had the experience in the last couple of weeks going to the planning board meeting of the county. I pulled a dark sky ordinance. So two of your organizations are related, and then they were doing the plan. And what struck me is I assumed coming back to California that everybody would be an environmentalist. You have some incredibly hostile forces on that planning board.
We're aware.
And it seems to me that the importance of networking like you're doing across the whole county, because we have a weird structure of our county because each of the commissions are elected by different districts. So, you know, you only can vote for one commissioner. And I was just shocked at some of the comments that some of these people said. They acted like, well, you would think they would be into local control, but they thought that this whole dark sky thing was just going to be an abomination. Fortunately, Mr. Wood is there to help us on planning board, but I think that's an important. You can't protect the Ojai Valley unless you can have influence over your county government. I live in the county part of Ojai, and that totally depended on what that planning board and what those commissioners do.
So-
I just think that's an important aspect.
No, I'm just going to repeat the question because I don't think everybody. Basically, it was the dark sky ordinance and the importance of understanding and working with not just the city of Ojai, but the county and our local government. Is that a good summary of that, or understanding how it works? Yeah.
Because people who don't live in Ojai will determine the outcome of that countywide ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not countywide, district ordinance, but it has to be voted on.
Yeah. Let me pause for 1 second. Let me ask these guys, well, we answer that, but then we'll just finish this part because then I certainly would like to open up to the audience. But yeah.
So are we responding to this?
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
I would just say absolutely, and it's something that I was speaking to earlier about the local impact with a big issue. Understanding the makeup of your local elected officials, both in the city is really important, but the county too, and understanding, right, that the county is all the unincorporated land, which is most of the Ojai Valley, is not the city of Ojai. So. And CFROG does, our focus is countywide. We're based here, of course, and so a lot of our early work was here and focuses here. But that's part of our strategy and plan moving forward. We meet with all supervisors. We monitor what all supervisors are doing and their relationships and strategize with our supporters across the county to meet. So we take constituents with us from that district when we go to meet with a supervisor from there. And I just really encourage you all to talk to your friends countywide, you know, about that issue and when there's candidates and elections and that type of thing, to be aware of that for sure.
Yeah, I would segue into that just a little bit too, because I think the Green Coalition is technically valley-wide, not just, we have a intimate relationship with the city as well, so that we do focus on the ways that the city can advance their own desire to become a sustainable California city. But one of the things that I think that this really does bring up is one of the challenges of really working and partnering with not only the city or municipalities or the county or any of the agencies is they have very specific mandates. They can't always work with you in ways that you might be able to. You need to understand what their mandate is. You need to understand what their influences are. And once you get into that political realm, that is one of the areas where you experience real challenges that aren't always obvious at first until you really build those relationships. And I think, one of the things that we really focus on is making sure that try not to create any villains in that process. Like there, without a doubt, in many ways we may have significant differences in the way we perceive solutions or the way that the world operates. But what we're looking for is being able to find those areas of common interest that allow us to build that relationship and accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. But it is difficult. When I think about the agencies that we work with, sometimes I got to really hunt and peck around to find who actually is interested in water security issues in the way that we are interested in water security issues.
So the work at the government level that CFROG is leading, and SOAR also, and Caryn Schmidt would be another one that would be on this panel, no sweat. But that work is so important, and we're trying to get the wording for regenerative agriculture incorporated onto the general plan, and that's up for renewal in 2020, and that's the constitution of this county. So it's so important to work with the government in that aspect. And for me, the word regenerative is key because I can define it easily as improving the resources we work with. And if you try and define sustainable, good luck. But regenerative I can define. So if you have a goal of improving the resources you work with, then you're being regenerative. And so working at that level, I think, is really important. But I also really think it's important that we're empowering individuals to do things on their own. And the simple act of composting, for instance, and that's connecting to nature, and it's improving the resources you work with, and it's increasing your soil carbon content all in one, and you're doing all those things. You know that the EPA is still allowed to tell you to increase your soil carbon content. I mean, that's still allowed. So that's basically taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it in the soil. So that's by composting, and you can do that on your own. We're also, we're working with the citrus growers, and not to just single them out, but they are a major part of our agriculture in the valley, and trying to get them to get to the point where there's no runoff from their property by mulching, simple things, And when you have an approach to agriculture that is kill everything apart from your citrus, that really doesn't work in a regenerative system, and it's certainly not increasing your soil carbon content. So if you have a property and you're able to have no water leave it when it rains, then you are part of the solution as far as I'm concerned, and if you can save some of that water, either it's recharging the groundwater or you're in some way reusing that water, recycling that water. These are things that you can personally take in hand and work with. So I think that at both levels, in the individual personal level and at the government level, you can work. And I work with public schools, and that's interesting when we offer programs for free to public schools, and then do they value them? I'm not sure about that, because they don't cost them anything. And it's interesting to look at Santa Barbara Unified School District, which actually pays to have school garden coordinators, for instance, which has to be provided by another nonprofit in this town, Food for Thought. And that's really important work, connecting kids to where their food comes from, and teaching them how to compost in their schools, having a nature connection in their schools. Are our local government supporting that? Well, Andy Cantwell's on the board of Food for Thought, but I don't know how much money they're giving to them, because they get it for free. So it's interesting, that balance of working with local government and getting them to value what you're doing. So it is a struggle. There are allies, there are partners, But you know, as Todd's saying, you know, it's a struggle.
Thank you. So I want to open up to the audience, but I want to ask you to think about how to ask your question. So I would encourage you to stand and to speak loudly enough that everyone can hear you, and think about what your question is, not just saying how you feel. And if you have a question for somebody individually, tell us who they are. You want to start?
Okay, Andy. My name is Phil White. I live in Ojai here. I'm also a member of the Planning Commission representing the Ojai Valley and other parts of Steve Bennett's district. The big thing that the Planning Commission is working on and the Board of Supervisors is working on is the new general plan that was mentioned, the 2040 general plan. And I'm really heartened to see a room full of what I would call environmental people, because that's going to be a big part of that general plan if the votes can be brought to make that happen. One question I would like to ask relates to an element that will be in the general plan, and would like to ask the group up here, and that's about climate change. One part of the general plan will be a climate action plan. And my question would be, how do you see climate change affecting the environment in Ojai and Ventura County? And what do you think we should be doing about it?
Thank you. That's great. Anyone?
I have one sentence. So I think Ventura County should be doing everything possible to reduce contributions to climate change. And so then that dovetails into specifically CFROG's work regarding reducing emissions related to oil and gas activities.
Well, I think that climate change is going to make us hotter and drier, and so I think that all of us are going to need to be planting more trees and conserving every drop of rainwater that falls and reusing our water. And of course the crew will help you. But those are going to be some of the green jobs of the future.
So there's three sinks for carbon, right? So carbon can go into the atmosphere, and we know that there's too much carbon in the atmosphere. Carbon can go into the ocean, and we know that there's too much carbon in the ocean. It's causing ocean acidification. And carbon can go into the ground, and we actually are losing carbon from the ground. Our soils are dying because there's not enough carbon in the ground. So the obvious thing is to put carbon back in the ground, right? And that's why we get back to increasing soil carbon content. And the best way to increase soil carbon content is with plants, because they take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and they pump it into the soil in the form of carbohydrates. And there you go. So, and around here, one of the things that just happened, and I think this is a really important experiment actually, we had that heat wave that crisped our native Quercus agrifolia, and it also did the avocados in, except where they were shaded by overstory nitrogen-fixing trees. And so if you're planting nitrogen-fixing trees, which are, every acre of land has 37,000 pounds of nitrogen above it that can't be utilized by plants until it's transformed into forms that they can use, and leguminous trees do that. So, you know, the experiments that are being done in the valley with that, with citrus growers right now, planting nitrogen-fixing trees so that they're pumping carbon and nitrogen into the soil. We need that sort of action. And so that's taking carbon out of the atmosphere, putting it in the ground along with nitrogen.
Thank you.
There are groups that are talking, so carbon sequestration in the general plan and getting big ag on board with that. So there's an effort.
Actually, and to shout out to Rincon Vitova and Secretary and Ron and Jan Whitehurst, because they are doing a lot of work on the general plan, is particularly around that carbon sequestration and using the right language that is needed to understand that. That's right. Yeah, Rincon Vitova and Secretary. If you want to plant, you know, have you noticed that there aren't any insects? I mean, you know, I'm trained as a evolutionary biologist, and it is an absolute disaster that we're in right now. It is a shocking thing that we're losing all our insects. So if you want to do something, you know, plant insectary habitat. And Rincon Vitova and Secretary will sell diverse insectary habitat that also will fix nitrogen in the soil. So these are, again, personal actions that you can take.
Yeah, I agree. I think on a regional level, climate science is so definitive at this point. It always continually stuns me that there is such resistance to being able to implement the kind of changes that we need to make over the next 50 years. And that includes this master plan. And the thing that truly amazes me is that it is still an absolute traffic stopper when you bring up climate science into a legislative conversation. And I don't know if that's happening on a countywide level, but I know that it's happening on a statewide and national level in lots of ways that are actually pretty frightening for me as a sustainability educator. So I think this is a place where we got to pull out the stops. If we really want to get climate science legislation and solutions into the master plan, we're going to have to work hard to get it in there. And we're going to have to work on the language, exactly something that David was talking about, because that's where you will find people fussing and worrying about specific language. And forgetting that really this is a very obvious thing that we can see happening all around us right now, and there's not going to be any avoiding it for future generations. So it's really important that get included in the master plan.
And just to speak to that a little bit, and this gentleman's question earlier, so since CFROG was involved with the general plan early on, we were able to advocate in the development of the vision and guiding principles. That's the name of a document that's part of the general plan. And the original wording proposed by staff did not include climate change or climate action in the vision, and we were able to advocate for that inclusion. And we had obvious and great support from the majority of the board, but there were the minority who questioned including that in the vision. So just to let you know, it's not unanimous. And then also making sure that there was a guiding principle regarding climate action and environmental justice. And just so you all know, the county conducted a survey, and over 70% of Ventura County residents said they want the county to be proactive when it comes to climate action. And so we're able to use that survey when we speak to our supervisors and say, you have a mandate from Ventura County. And so reminding them of that during the process. And one more little plug, so you can email, so always contact your supervisor, but you can also send a note to clerkoftheboard@ventura.org, clerkoftheboard@ventura.org, in advance of a meeting. And the next general plan meeting's October 16th. And just say, this is about the general plan, and say what you think. And you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to get everything right, but if you just kind of share why you think climate action and climate change is important to you, that goes in the official administrative record and is reviewed by all the supervisors.
I want to mention that I know a lot of you RSVP'd online, and your email address is there, and every one of these people up here, I'm going to get something, whatever they want me to include, to send to you. I am going to send to you, and it might have that link. Is there another question out there? Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, by the way, I'm Paul, and I have a question for you guys. Would it be helpful, I know you have a lot of meetings, but would it be helpful to meet regularly with each other? I keep thinking there's so much that you offer each other, and there are other groups that could be included. I think initially, when I was with the coalition, that was the idea. It was a coalition of environmentalists, and we did have the county come to our meetings, and I think that issues have gotten so much more intense now, and it would be really helpful to have you with each other. I'm just curious whether you can handle another meeting.
Well, I want to just say quickly, one of the things that came out of the Thomas Fire was a grassroots council that is a community council called the Restoration and Resilience Council that meets monthly. And I know I know that's not really what you're talking about here, but it's certainly a venue where discussions like this could be included, and discussions about creating action plans associated with that conversation could be included as well. But I do, you're right about, we have lots of meetings.
And I think just to echo what Brendan said about being with great people who care about the earth. It is just really comforting to get together. If we're working, and this is really hard work, and it's an uphill battle, and so it is a great idea, and I think maybe there's something we can do.
One of the things that happened with the Green Coalition was, remember, we would have those community get-togethers with a speaker and the Chaparral, and we'd have a potluck, and it would be great. But you can't have a potluck where there's no entrance fee because of health concerns at the county level, right? So we were nixed from doing that. It's actually illegal to have a free potluck that you invite the public to. Yeah, yeah.
My name's Dee, and I've been visiting Ohio for 30 years. We grew up here, and we just moved back. Over those 30 years, I've been running along the trails and coming up here and doing all these things. But in terms of getting people together, make it as simple as possible. Meet at a restaurant, have a breakfast once a month, or have a happy hour once a month. Patronize all the businesses that patronize you, and just make it easy. Or put out an email that says, I have a problem that I need to discuss with all of you for our next monthly meeting. So you have a small agenda. You know how to do it.
Well,
I
so-
know you're really busy, and I'm just so excited and inspired to be here. I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to volunteer. But
Yeah. So Todd mentioned that we've been trying to meet for some time, and one of my items on the list that I wanted to talk to him about is just that thing. There's actually a group in Thousand Oaks that has happy hour once a month called Green Drinks and Sustainability.
Cream de
So
menthe.
where are we going to meet? And
Actually, that brings up the Topa Topa Brewing is going to be opening in town soon, and they're a
But we'll-
major supporter of the 1% for the planet. So that's
but we'll call it regenerative instead of sustainable.
regenerative drinks.
Yep.
Yes, please stand.
My name is Chris Young. I have a question for you all about Firebreaks. I was thinking about them the other day and sort of feeling like I would love to know that we had some gigantic break around the valley. But my question to you specifically is, anybody have any experience or thoughts about, instead of just a break, what about if breaks were filled with cactus with no Padres? Would that water help slow things down?
Caryn and I are both looking at each other. We could have an entire new panel discussion just on the issue of fire breaks and how best to protect our communities from wildfire. Our organization is really, and what the science is starting to show is that there actually is, the Forest Service has a fuel break that stretches 70 miles from basically the Topa Topa bluffs all the way out to Lake Casitas. It failed in a lot of parts during the Thomas Fire, but what scientists are starting to look at now is that in addition to just relying on fuel breaks, instead of just focusing on, okay, we need to clear Chaparral so it doesn't burn, and sort of seeing Chaparral as the enemy, shifting that conversation around and saying, fuel breaks don't always work all the time. One of the most effective ways to protect communities from wildfire is to focus on the home and work outwards. And so number one, is your home fire safe? Do you have leaves sitting in your rain gutters? That's a first spot, ember. Embers can travel a mile or more when a fire is burning if the wind is really kicking up. If one of those embers lands in your rain gutter, there goes your whole house right there. Looking at what's your roof made out of? Is it made out of fire-safe material or is it made out of wood? Looking at other things like, do you have a pile of firewood stacked right up against your house? Things that can ignite easily will then ignite your house on fire. And then working out from there, defensible space. Do you have between 50, 60, or 100 feet of vegetation cleared to varying degrees? We're not talking about a clear cut around your own home.
You can still have trees.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, it's very important to say you can still have trees. You have to limb them up, but you can still have trees.
Exactly. So looking at solutions like that, I think is where the conversation is starting to shift with a lot of fire ecologists and scientists. If we're going to clear vegetation, it needs to be done close to communities instead of further out in the middle of nowhere. And that's where the current science is emerging. It's always this emerging body of knowledge, Chaparral fire ecology, and we're learning that Chaparral fire ecology is different conifer fire ecology. You want fires in coniferous forests every 10, 15, maybe 20 years, generally. In Chaparral, if you have a fire every 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to deplete the seed bank and get a bunch of non-native plants growing in its place. So a lot of people are just starting to now realize, and scientists are really starting to focus more on, okay, Chaparral fire ecology is different than what we've sort of learned with Smokey the Bear and fires in forests. What can we do differently then to protect our communities from wildfire that way? And again, this could be a 2-hour-long panel in itself, but that's kind of a nutshell of where things are headed.
Anything else? Yes.
John Roberts, and I have a question for anybody. Is there anything we can do to help our oak trees? Because really, that's what Ojai is about, the beautiful oak trees. And of course, we can't go around watering them, the drain, like you see this, but I was thinking like maybe when the branches come down and they chip them, to try to put them on the soil and cool the soil all around the valley. I mean, I put 5 inches on my land just to keep the soil cool. So I'm wondering if there's been discussion about that.
Well, I'll just say I'm also a board member of Ojai Trees, another environmental organization. I think there's another board member here I see somewhere. Mulching, absolutely. In fact, I was wondering if the fact that we've had this leaf fall since the heat wave is actually an adaptation, because what it does is it creates an even thicker layer of mulch, keeping the moisture and the coolness in the soil. But you know, when you go to a natural area, the oak mulch and humus underneath the oak trees is inches and inches and inches and inches deep, and that is what it's supposed to be. So the fact that we are mowing and blowing every little scrap so that we have this oak tree that's not protected in that way because we think it looks neater and better is actually detrimental to the health of our trees. And I guess I would just say, I know people are afraid of oak trees. I wrote a letter to the editorial in the paper about this. If we are afraid of trees and we cut them down, then we will turn into the desert that we're currently not. We're a Mediterranean climate, and we have a rainy season, and the trees are part of that rain cycle, and they bring the water into the ground. So we have groundwater, so our environment is cooled, and when you cut down trees, the soil dries out, it bakes, it gets hotter, and that's a reinforcing cycle. So more trees.
Yeah, oak trees are evergreen. These the coast live oaks are. They're evergreen, and they're gonna respond to drought conditions like this. They're gonna have die off. I mean, there is, especially in times of drought. I confess I've never seen it quite like this, but I have seen it happen before, and it's, I think it's an adaptive response. In many ways, it can also go too far, in terms of the tree's ability to respond. So my hopes are that, I think the mulching is absolutely, like a correct first response for the trees, adaptive. Certainly not adding water at this point. It'd be, it probably would take them out, just let that happen naturally. But
Also puts the carbon back.
Yep.
in
Right. So I think that it, as radical as it looks right now, I think that it's a pretty natural response that we just have to kind of take in stride.
The oak trees, the population of oak trees that we have is aging, and we need recruitment. We need young oaks, and a simple way to do that is if you do have acorns, is to get a 15-gallon orchard tub and fill it with soil and put the acorns on top, and then they'll sprout. And then leave them for a year, and then you can transplant them. There's one possibility, but we can also just put acorns straight in the ground, and that's probably the most effective way to plant oak trees, is just a direct seed. And guess what? Once Upon a Watershed does that with your kids.
Do you have a question? Yes.
Hi, my name is Edith Hamilton. I've worked in agriculture most of my life in technology, and the last 10 years focused on micronutrients and microbes for growers, homeowners, houses, grow soil, and maintaining their growing program holistically and sustainably.
Thank you. I want to ask you a question, and you might not want to answer it, and that's okay. But this has come up a few times recently, and that is that if we look at the lake level and we see what funds the lake, we have two streams that come through, and then it gets about 30% replenishment from the runoff that would go down to the Ventura River. So there's some thought about trying to appeal to the government to say, instead of having some water go down to the ocean, trying to spur the trout to go upstream and then to reproduce, have as much of that water go directly into the lake to replenish faster. So the suggestion is at some threshold, some number, 25% capacity, whatever that number is, what would you support something like that? Would you question it? Any thoughts about that?
My immediate thought is before you were to kind of implement draconian measures like that you really make an effort to address the water management issues that we can create in this community that would probably offset the need for having to do that.
Like sequestering the bioswales, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean the watershed approach, landscaping designs, carbon sequestration. There are any number of water management regimens that we could create within the city and within that I think that we should utilize before we get into measures like that. That's my personal opinion.
So I work with an organization called Sierra Watershed Progressive. They're based near to Yosemite, and they have offices in Ojai. And one of the special things about Ojai is that we're water independent. We're not on state water yet. And yeah, one person clapped. And so
they clapped because we're not, or we
well, that's a good question. And so we are actually at the state level, this is used as an example of ways that we can improve our local water resilience. And Regina Hirsch is the person I would put you in touch with to talk to. So that's Sierra Watershed Progressive. And they, for instance, are working at Thatcher School to do their rainwater, stormwater, grey water. They do black water systems too, and are reducing, I think, depending on how you measure their water use, they've reduced Thatcher's water use 30 to 50% already. So that's the sort of thing that we're doing at the level of organized, big, schools like Thatcher, 650 acres, right? The biggest per capita horse owner in Ventura County, Thatcher School. So talk about total daily maximum load of nitrates is a big issue. So yeah, there are things that we can do that are about our own watershed that is not about having a centralized organization providing us with piped water. But when you think about diverting water into the lake, and there is that diversion, the Robles diversion, but how are you going to divert water in there? How about taking Matilha Dam down? And we got 6 million cubic yards of silt behind that dam, and a whole steelhead habitat that hasn't been able to be accessed since 1948. And we need that to happen. And Paul Jenkin, bless his heart, has been working on that for over 20 years. It's just to give you a realization of the massive amount of work that goes into making changes, and I really hope that that's going to come down soon, but there's, Casitas is concerned about the silt going into their lake, so if you're diverting water into the lake, you're going to get sediment going in there too, so, I think that homeowners allowing water to infiltrate into the ground and not running off to the sea is probably more important.
So we're out of time, but let's go for one more question.
I'll keep it brief because I could probably talk about all this because it does make you feel like you are a part of something bigger. My name is Amber Beeson, and I am a sustainable landscape designer. This is actually my mother. So I grew up in a sustainable agricultural and horticultural family. My father studied phytoremediation for almost 30 years. And I developed and built a school and community garden program, and I really respect this man up here because we have a lot of similar tastes and interests in that realm. I believe that you have to teach the children, and I do believe that there is an element of government and, of course, local involvement, and then all of these wonderful people who get up every day, and I know how hard it is to be a part of these groups that really are striving kind of an uphill battle. My comment is actually about water because that has been my focus for the last 10 years, is trying to create irrigation systems that are ultimately as sustainable or regenerative as possible, because absolutely that is the truth. You have to hold not only your micronutrients in the ground through having trees and vegetation, which is in the phytoremediation, which is using plants to clean contaminated soil and to do the job of carbon sequestration. But the mentality that a lot of people have in the case of drought or in the case of extreme situations like ours is just literally to shut the water off and to remove their plants from their environment. You have to actually bank and store as much water as possible, but then you need to utilize the water that you can use to its maximum capacity and try to preserve it within a reasonable amount of depth. Where your vegetation is planted ultimately, because eventually it will seep below that and enter into our table. That is just common sense, but the longer it can be maintained within a certain level to feed the feeder roots and all of the micronutrients that are there, the better off we are in storing water. There's been studies everywhere. 70% of urban water essentially is used by outdoor landscaping. So my logic has always been the biggest and most important place for us to conserve is on our own properties. And some of my work in the past, I worked in different green programs and I had my own as well, is we actually combined the efforts of individuals, volunteers, business owners, large businesses, and we did an awards banquet annually where we celebrated their individual efforts, big or small, on conservation. But I have found in my industry that I'm kind of one of a tiny percent that understands some of the new technology that's been created since the drought, and I actually butt heads commonly or consistently with other peers who have been doing something the same way for 30 years, and they believe that that is the best way because they understand it really well. And the industry manufacturers constantly say that even when they provide free education, as you put it, free education is not as valued, that people do not absorb the bounty of opportunities and options that we have now to improve our irrigation management. And I really hope that eventually there will be more talk on how the individual business or a homeowner or group like ourselves in the Ojai Valley can work on conserving our outdoor water use, because simply just shutting it off makes it much, much worse in the long run. So, thanks.
So I do have to say, and I'm sure some of you relate to this, you see the news and you hear sort of politically, environmentally and so on, that things can seem very bleak, but when I'm in a room like this and I hear actually what's happening and solutions, it fills me with a lot of hope. So I hope you feel the same way. And I want to thank our panelists for their time and expertise very much.
Thanks, Andy.